I think the overall memory was the vastness of it all, how big it was. And in those days, I mean, there was no form of communication. You were totally isolated from the rest of the world, especially when you were in places like India and Pakistan and Iran, and it was pretty, you were very cut off. Well, the thinking behind it was first of all, we gathered together in Madrid. There was players coming and going, and eventually the coach, Bob Cap, selected 18 boys or 18 young guys that were going to go on this trip to help mold this into a team for the opening of the North American Soccer League, which was to commence in 1968. No, actually there was very little. I doubt whether there was any money made. In fact, it was more, as I said, a team bonding, team building, putting together, playing 38 games in 6 months, and then we arrived in Dallas and for the start of the North American Soccer League. Well, in some places, some areas, we were greeted very friendly, and in other areas, not so much. I remember one specific incident that happened in Singapore, where halfway through the game, we ended up fighting with the other team. One of their players picked up a corner flag and was attacking our players with it, and the crowd were trying to get into it as well, and the whole thing was that because we were the Dallas Tornadoes, they associated Dallas with the assassination of President Kennedy. Yeah, for publicity purposes, yes. It was Bob Cap's idea that that was the image they wanted to present. I remember standing in the stadium in Real Madrid Stadium on a Sunday afternoon, and we were all dressed up in these cowboy gear, getting photographs taken. And in fact, there's a photograph of the Dallas Tornadoes in the Real Madrid Museum. So it was all for publicity purposes. Pretty scary, actually. But the thing I remember most was helicopters. When we flew into Saigon, all you could hear was helicopters taking off and going more or less 24/7. We went on a helicopter down the Mekong Delta. We played an exhibition game in a camp. We played against some American servicemen. We played the Vietnamese under-21 national team I believe on a Friday evening, and then on a Sunday afternoon we played the national team. Big crowds at the stadium, but wherever we went, it was always under heavy police guards, and it was a scary time. And right after we left, the Tet Offensive occurred. We were actually in the embassy. We had a reception in the American embassy, and about two weeks later, the embassy was sacked in the Tet Offensive, I believe. Yeah, there was a lot of danger. I mean, it was there were riots in Pakistan, and when we were crossing the border, coming from Pakistan into India, only the British players, the players who were carrying British passports, were allowed to cross. All the other boys, the Danish boys and the Swedish boys and the Dutch boys and our one American boy, they weren't allowed to cross, and they had to stay virtually in a little village right on the border of India and Pakistan. And it was quite a trip, really, when you think about it. There were lots of people walking around. It was, they didn't want you standing anywhere for any long particular time. They wanted you to just keep moving along, because there were a lot of drive-by shootings, people on the back of scooters with hand grenades and with machine guns. But they did allow us out, but you had to keep moving. You weren't allowed to stand still at all. Yeah, that's true. It was actually the one good thing about the coach was he was quite an educator, and he wanted us to get some culture, and he took us to the Acropolis, and in his trying to get us all a little bit of culture, he perhaps saved our lives because we were delayed and couldn't get back to the airport, and we missed our flight by about 45 minutes to half an hour, and apparently the flight was blown up by a Greek Cypriot. They were looking for a general, and the general late came out on the next flight with us I think about 2 hours later. Well, it was it was the first time I think anybody was refused to, it was people we would go into, say, perhaps a restaurant, and there was no form of communication. Sometimes they wouldn't let guailos or guaipas go in there, so it was a little bit uneasy in that way. But other than that, it was the Japanese people were very, very friendly people, very nice people. We played on Christmas Eve. We played in the National Stadium in Tokyo, and then we took the bullet train the next day up to Hokkaido, and we played in Hokkaido the next day on Boxing Day. Well, I think there's wonderful stories from the tour. I think one of the things was the friendship that we all created amongst ourselves as all these, the young Swedish guys, English guys, Dutch guys, and about how we bonded and how we formed together. And some of the memories, playing in Tahiti, playing in all these, when we landed in Tehran, it was the Shah of Iran then was, it was his crowning, and it was called the Year of 1,000 Lights, and Tehran was lit up tremendously well, and just little things like that you remember. But overall, it could never, I doubt whether anybody could replicate the trip again. It was just, I don't know how anybody ever coordinated it. Playing in Burma, and then the next day we're in Ceylon, and then the next day we're in Pakistan. It was like a coordinator's nightmare. We did very poorly, to be honest with you. I was the only player to play in every game, the whole 32 games. We were a spent force. We were very, very tired. Not only did when we arrived back from the tour, then we went off again to Costa Rica and Nicaragua to play 3 more games. So we were pretty spent. We were tired, mentally and physically.